I think this is the year that the Falcons finally win the NFC South for the first time since 2016. I've spent the last week rewatching the 2023 Atlanta Falcons, which is how you know I'm doing great. And in this video, we're going to break down every part of the Falcons roster and how they compare to the rest of the league. I have them ranked as the 16th best team in the NFL, first in the NFC South. And throughout the video, we're going to be looking at these roster rating graphics. What I've done is I've given every player in the NFL a rating from 65 to 99. I've got the Falcons offense up on the screen right now. These ratings are scaled so that 75 is an average starter, 99 is prime Aaron Donald, prime Tom Brady, and a 65 is a true UDFA practice squad type of player or someone that just doesn't have any tape, so there's nothing for me to evaluate. And I'll put up a breakdown for the rating scale of what each range means and what percentage of NFL players fall into that range. And then all of those ratings are combined into positional ratings, unit ratings, and then overall team ratings. And the positions are weighted by this table. So for example, wide receiver makes up 14% of the offense rating, and that breaks down to 65% for wide receiver 1, 20% for wide receiver 2, and 10 and 5% for wide receiver 3 and 4. So I have the Falcons ranked 16th in the NFL, and after finishing with 7 wins in 5 of the last 6 seasons, I think this is the year they finally break through to become true playoff contenders. Briefly looking at their stats from last year, the Falcons were a league average offense by most metrics, but as you can see with the PFF passing grade, the quarterback play really held them back. They were alternating between Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke, and sometimes Heineke would be okay for like the first couple drives after they benched Desmond Ridder, but overall it was the worst quarterback room in the NFL. It wasn't a stacked offensive roster, but certainly good enough to be a playoff team with a league average quarterback, and they just didn't have that. And then defensively, they were about as good as you could be with a terrible pass rush. They ranked 8th in yards per play, 5th in success rate, 3rd in third down conversion rate, 4th in red zone conversion rate. Obviously, Raheem Morris has a proven track record as a defensive coordinator, so it's not necessarily a downgrade, but I did think Ryan Nielsen did a great job to really stabilize this side of the ball. And outside of the glaring weakness that is pass rushing, it's actually a pretty solid defensive roster. They ranked 30th in pressure rate, actually 19th in sack rate. They did a pretty solid job of manufacturing sacks with stunts and twists. And then the run defense was outstanding, lowest EPA per play in the NFL, 2nd in stuff percentage. That's without Grady Jarrett for most of the season. I expect that to continue for the Falcons this year. They should be one of the better run defenses in the NFL. So getting into the roster, starting with the offense, I have them ranked as the 14th best offense in the NFL, and I have them with a 78 for their offensive coordinator rating, which ranks tied for 20th in the NFL, but I could easily see it ending up being a lot higher than that. I think Zach Robinson was an outstanding hire and has a bright future. It's just really difficult to rate first-time coaches and first-time play callers. We've seen so many of these hires that look great on paper just not work out, and it's obviously really tough to separate what's Zach Robinson, what's Sean McVay. So there's a lot of these rookie coaches that I have rated a little bit lower than I actually think they're going to perform, but with how much uncertainty there is and just in general how tough it is to evaluate coaches, I have to be a little bit conservative in that area. If we give Zach Robinson an 84, which is what I have for Todd Monken, who's a second-year offensive coordinator for Baltimore, that shoots their offensive ranking up to 9th overall. So I think if the Robinson hire hits, this could absolutely be a top 10 offense. I have this as the 13th best quarterback room in the NFL. I think they upgraded with 2 players that would have been the best quarterback on their roster last year. If you go back to any analysis of the Falcons offense from last summer, it almost became annoying how often everybody had to couch every single statement with if Desmond Ridder ends up being good. But the reason we all had to be so repetitive is because despite how good the rest of the offensive roster was, a bottom 3 quarterback can absolutely tank that, and it doesn't matter how good the skill positions, how good the offensive line is. And Desmond Ridder showed up year 2, and the worst case scenario was immediately realized. He was inaccurate, turned the ball over, took a bunch of sacks, fumbled a lot, really struggled to push the ball down the field consistently. It's hard to think of a more impactful upgrade upgrade around the entire NFL than going from Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins. Kirk is accurate, he's a great decision maker, decent arm strength, he has an outstanding feel for targeting windows against zone coverage over the middle of the field. He can throw with velocity, but he can also layer throws into those tight windows and throw the change of pace ball. This play against San Francisco just sticks out of my mind, the way he can layer this over Dre Greenlaw's hand. Before he got injured, he was having one of the better seasons of his career. Out of 9 seasons as a full-time starter, he was on pace for his second highest completion rate, third highest PFF grade, lowest turnover-worthy play rate, highest adjusted completion rate, third highest passer rating, and he also led the NFL with an 8.5% drop rate, so a lot of the box score stats are kind of underselling what he was doing last year. The question with Kirk Cousins is the same one that it's always been. Can he elevate his surrounding core? Can he win in the playoffs? I'm not big into analyzing whether or not quarterbacks are clutch. I think ESPN's got you covered there. A lot of times, in my opinion, most of that analysis is just reaching at really small sample sizes, and in the playoffs you are facing better teams, so it's just more difficult to win there than it is in the regular season. I think there is somewhat of a lack of creativity out of structure with Kirk Cousins. He doesn't give you very much with his legs, and even though he is really tough to stand in the pocket and take hits, he's not great at avoiding sacks and escaping pressure. But as a Falcons fan, I feel like if you're coming out of the 2024 season and the main thing you're upset about is, you know, Kirk couldn't get you over the hump and you lost in the NFC Championship game, that alone is a win. And then they also upgraded at quarterback 2 with Michael Penix Jr., who they took 8th overall. I still can't endorse the pick. I mean, looking at this roster, I can't tell you how much a player like Rome Odunze would tie this offense together. But if Kirk Cousins goes down with an injury, I think Michael Penix is a better player than Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke, and they have one of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL. Moving on to running back, I have this as the 3rd best running back room, and that's led by Bijan Robinson, who was pretty much as advertised as a rookie. I think he already has arguably the best jump cut in the NFL. His ability to make defenders miss in open space is elite. For every player, there's 1 or 2 plays that like stick out of my mind whenever I think about them. For Bijan, it's the swing pass against Carolina where he catches the ball, makes the first defender miss, and then splits the next 2 tacklers into the end zone. And then that toss play against the Packers where he stacks 3 jump cuts back to back to back, breaks 3 defenders' ankles. But then there's also the touchdown against Houston where he catches the shovel pass with one hand, shakes the safety in the open field into the end zone. You see on a couple of his longer receiving touchdowns from both of the Saints games, his ability to outrun linebackers, burn pursuit angles. At his size, he just has special lateral change of direction, suddenness in the open field, creativity to avoid tackles. His vision, I would say, is a B+. For the most part, he's hitting the right gap. There were a couple duo runs where I think he left some yards on the field, but overall pretty solid in that area. The main thing he just has to improve is the fumbles. He had 4 fumbles in 2023. Ball security is really the one area where I felt like you couldn't say his rookie season was a resounding success. And if there's anything we got wrong about the 2023 running back class, it's that Jahmyr Gibbs was probably a little bit closer to Robinson, at least than I thought, but that has more to do with Jahmyr than it does to do with Bijan. And then Tyler Algier is a really solid RB2, doesn't quite have the playmaking ability to create when the blocking isn't as good, but if you block up an outside zone run for 5 yards, he'll get 5 yards. I definitely want to see Robinson featured more as the lead ball carrier this year, although I didn't have as big of an issue with the carry split last year as some fantasy football people did. I wouldn't personally be in the business of drafting running backs in the top 10, but if I did, I definitely wouldn't just run them into the ground with 300 carries in their rookie season. So I definitely understand the thought process there. Receiver is the biggest weakness on the Falcons roster. I have them 22nd in the NFL. I am a huge Drake London fan, and despite underwhelming production in his first 2 years, I feel very confident about him as a quality wide receiver 1. I think he's established himself as one of the elite contested catch receivers in the NFL. At 6'5", he can box out corners, high point the ball, secure the catch through contact. He has the dominant physical profile that helps him in that area, but he also has really good ball tracking and focus at the catch point. But this is not Hakeem Butler. It's not just a tall dude with good hands. Drake London has rare change of direction fluidity and route running ability at his size. He separates out of his breaks consistently, especially in the short to intermediate range. And I've said this before, but I view the high-end comp for Drake London as like a taller Michael Thomas. You see this play against the Bucs, He's running an in-breaking route, but he's got the corner Zion McCollum with his hips pointed to the sideline. So all he has to do is just eat up this cushion, stem his route to the outside hip for as long as possible, and then at the top of the route, he plants the outside foot, clean transition into his break, and he crosses the defender's face. This play against Tennessee, he's selling this inside release seam route, quick break out to the sideline. He's open out of his break, but Heineke can't get him the ball. He's one of the rare players that has the foot quickness and the play strength to be really effective against press coverage. Good job here on this quick slant against Washington. Even though St. Juste is able to land the two-hand punch, it just bounces right off of him. And you see that combo of quickness and play strength play out with his downfield routes. He's completely unbothered by grabby man coverage down the field, and he does a really good job with his hands to extend separation out of his break. This play against Carlton Davis, he separates on the deep out using the push-by technique. He releases inside. Once he gets about 4 to 5 yards into the stem, Carlton Davis throws up his hand to establish contact, but then London swipes it down, breaks outside in one continuous motion. If he broke outside without using his hands, Carlton Davis would have a point of contact to slow down Drake London's release, but also help him get his hips turned to the sideline. By releasing contact, Davis doesn't have anything to grab onto. He just has to try to mirror him at full speed down the field. Same thing here against JC Horn. It's outside leverage, so he's basically forcing the inside release. 5 to 6 yards into the stem, Horn has his hips turn in the opposite direction of Drake London's break. He uses the push-by technique, clean change of direction, and he's wide open. So you've got a historically big receiver with great hands, excellent change of direction skills, and route running technique. His one limitation is that he just isn't very fast, so he's not going to really outrun corners down the field. If you want to get him the ball deep down the sideline, it's most likely going to be a contested target unless he's able to separate with a stop and go or some other kind of double move. But I think Drake London's just going to eat on those 15 to 20 yard digs and outs from Kirk Cousins. He finally has a good quarterback throwing him the football. Once he kind of firmly plants his flag as a wide receiver 1, then you can start to have the debate about, is he a top 10 guy? Is he more top 15 to 20? I think the lack of a true vertical element could limit him from being a top 5 to 7 receiver, but you can absolutely win with Drake London as your wide receiver 1. But their other receivers are where I start to get more concerned. Even with Drake London, I still think it's a below average receiver room, but if he gets injured, I think this passing game could get pretty scary. They traded Desmond Ridder to the Cardinals for Rondale Moore, addition by subtraction if you ask me, and Rondale Moore's like a deep threat gadget type of receiver, never really been able to find a consistent role in the NFL. I went through most of his 2023 tape and he had a few really nice plays. He got a touchdown on Derek Stingley here on this deep post. He ran this wheel route against the Steelers, outruns Patrick Peterson, and then makes a really nice contested catch in the end zone. And then this is an incredible comeback stop route against Cam Taylor-Britt. You can see he's got the speed, he's got the start-stop ability, change of direction. They gave him a good amount of screen targets. He also had 178 rushing yards, which was the second most of any receiver, second to Deebo Samuel. So he can be effective in that gadget role and then maybe give you a couple big plays down the field each year. But even though he has some of the natural physical traits where you'd think he could develop into a good route runner, he doesn't have the precise footwork to be a consistent separator. He's also lacking the play strength to deal with physical man coverage, and press coverage is kind of a non-starter. And then he had an 11% drop rate, career 35% contested catch rate. He hasn't really been a player that you can trust to convert on the limited opportunities that he gets. And at 5'7", 180, he's not really going to win over the top of people on contested targets. They also signed Darnell Mooney from Chicago, who's steadily gotten less and less productive since his mini breakout year in 2021, where he did have over 1,000 yards. Last year, he had 31 receptions, 414 yards, 1 touchdown. He did have a 14% drop rate, and his previous career high was 4.7%, so that could be an area that you see some positive regression for Darnell Mooney. He was not reliable catching the football last year, and that extended to contested catch situations as well, where he was 2 of 11. And, you know, he's an undersized player, 173 pounds. His career contested catch rate is 29.4%. He has the speed to win vertically, but he's got to be wide open because he's not really fighting through contact. I think there were some things working against Darnell Mooney last year. Justin Fields probably a step ahead of of Desmond Ridder, but not great quarterback play. He had a lot of uncatchable targets. There's definitely some production that was left on the field. There were a lot of catchable but inaccurate targets or plays where he was initially wide open, but Justin Fields didn't see him quickly enough, and so the defender had time to get back into the picture. But on those plays, you also see his lack of physicality at the catch point, doesn't really box defenders out and work back to the football. With better quarterback play, he's probably more than a 414 yards and 1 touchdown caliber receiver, but he's not good enough against press coverage to be a consistent deep threat. He has some wiggle and change of direction ability, but not a refined, consistent route runner. I really see Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore as ideally a team's wide receiver 4, but they're going to be forced into a wide receiver 2 and 3 role. They added Ray McCloud from the 49ers, who's been a career wide receiver 4 or 5. He is a good returner, but not going to be more than a complementary piece in the passing game. Similar story with Kadero Hodge, never eclipsed 250 yards in his career. I think Hodge, McCloud, and the rookie Casey Washington will probably be battling for the last 2 receiver spots. And if they're fully healthy, this is a passable receiver room. But like I said, if Drake London gets injured, I think this passing game is in major trouble. But they do get a boost from the tight end position. I have them with the 12th best tight end room in the NFL. Most of that is led by Kyle Pitts. He only had 667 yards, 3 touchdowns last year, and on tape he looked like kind of a shell of his former self, and I feel like this was pretty evident based on the tape, but it was confirmed after the season that he was not fully healthy. He was coming off of an MCL and PCL surgery and just wasn't as dynamic of a route runner, certainly not as much of a vertical threat as he looked like early in his career. And despite recovering from the injury, he still had some incredible plays on his tape that not a lot of tight ends in the NFL can make. Right here he runs an out and up. As he's getting into this outbreak, he's got Scott Miller accelerating behind him on the deep post, which occupies Carlton Davis's coverage, and Davis isn't able to change assignments quickly enough. Pitts makes the catch and then outruns him to the end zone. Incredible contested catch here against the Panthers. Really difficult adjustment against double coverage. This play against Washington, he beats the press coverage, high points the ball in the back of the end zone, and then an example here from the same game of how you just can't really put a linebacker on him. Shakes Jamin Davis at the top of the route, gets some yards after the catch. He also had his share of overthrown deep targets where he was wide open, which he's very much used to at this point in his career. And a lot of his production last year was on corner routes and deep outs as kind of the intermediate option on like a sail concept against zone coverage. He actually had the 2nd most yards of any receiver or tight end on corner routes last season. Compared to some other things, there isn't necessarily a ton of skill involved in running these routes, although sometimes, you do have to read the coverage, read the leverage of the defender. But even at 60% or whatever you want to say he was at from a health perspective, he was still one of the best route running tight ends. He's still a player that you have to treat as a receiver from a personnel standpoint. You can just never match him up with a tight end. And even against slot corners, he was still a solid separator. But because the Falcons didn't really have other options last year, they pretty much had to treat Kyle Pitts as their 2nd outside receiver. And when he was lined up on the outside, which was about 26% of his snaps, he was nowhere near as effective. This plot has yards per route run lined up in the slot versus lined up on the outside, and out of receivers and tight ends that had at least 100 routes in both, Kyle Pitts had one of the biggest splits in effectiveness. The top left corner of the plot is players who were efficient in the slot but not efficient on the outside. When he got matched up with an outside corner, he just didn't have the speed or the quickness out of breaks to separate with any kind of route, really. Thinking back to that play from his rookie season where he beat, I think it was Xavier Howard on like a go route down the sideline, it's just a completely different caliber of athlete based on his injury situation last year. So that was a very inefficient aspect of the Falcons offense last year, and hopefully he can return to prior form because the Falcons didn't really upgrade at wide receiver 2, so he's still going to be forced into that role some. They also brought in Charlie Warner from the 49ers, actually a really good run blocker, but 11 career receptions, probably not going to give you a whole lot in the passing game. And John Fitzpatrick was a 6th round pick in 2022, only had 1 reception in his rookie season, so maybe he can carve out some kind of role. And final offensive position group is the offensive line, which I have ranked 8th in the NFL. They're definitely better in the run game than they are in pass protection, but still I think a clear top 10 unit, and they don't really have a true weak link at any of the 5 spots. Going left to right, Jake Matthews has been been one of the most consistent, reliable starters over the last decade. PFF grades aren't everything, but he's had 9 consecutive seasons with a PFF pass blocking grade above 77. You could actually make the argument that he's the worst run blocker out of the starting 5. Not that he's bad, he just doesn't generate many positive plays, but he's a reliable pass blocker, just a consistent B+ starter that you don't have to worry about. They took Matthew Bergeron in the 2nd round last year. He had kind of a standard expected rookie season for an offensive lineman. I thought he showed a ton of flashes in the run game. This reach block on the front side of wide zone from the Packers game, I think is one of the best run blocks from anyone last year. The Colts game, he had a couple really nice blocks on the 2nd level, connecting to linebackers and putting them on the ground. He got a pancake on Derek Brown, which does have an asterisk because he tripped on another player, but still a really nice block. And then he had a few great reach blocks in the first Saints matchup from week 12. You definitely want to see some improvement in pass pro. I thought the main area he struggled as a rookie was dealing with power, which is pretty standard for rookie offensive linemen. There were a lot of plays where he was just late with his punch, let a bull rush get into his frame, and then he doesn't have that natural play strength yet to set a firm anchor when he doesn't have his hands positioned. Aiden Hutchinson beats him here with the bull rush, gets into his frame, walks him back, disengages, and gets the strip sack on Desmond Ridder. This play, Nathan Shepard uses a fake cross chop into a bull rush, gets some displacement into the pocket for the sack. Right here, he's just late to react to Kenny Clark's bull rush. He walks him back into the pocket, hits Desmond Ridder, and he ends up throwing an interception. The Jets game was also a pretty tough outing. He had a few losses to Quinnen Williams, and there were some times he had problems with cross-face moves and sliding his feet in pass pro, but overall, I think the biggest issue was dealing with power. There were some good flashes. I like some of the stuff he did with his hand usage. This is a great rep against Aiden Hutchinson, initially setting outside to the 3-tech. When Hutchinson tries to cross his face through the A-gap, great job of cutting off that inside counter with his right hand. This play, you see DeForest Buckner getting into his cross chop. As he's swinging his arms, he exposes his frame, so Bergeron comes in with a quick 2-hand punch and stalls all of his momentum. So he's got to get stronger and time up his hands better, but I do expect him to be at least a league average guard. At center, they've got Drew Dahlman, who was a 4th round pick in 2021. I didn't do individual run blocking and pass blocking ratings, but if I did, Drew Dahlman would probably have one of the biggest splits of any NFL offensive lineman. He's developed into a borderline elite run blocker, one of the best reach blocking, zone blocking centers in the NFL. He's undersized, which gives him some issues in pass pro, but his ability to get his hips turned around, seal off defenders to the backside is as good as it gets in the NFL. I think he's definitely the weak link from a pass protection standpoint, but in the run game, he's a true weapon for the Falcons offense. And the pass pro, I think, is more below average than terrible. He's not like a liability out there. I have Chris Lindstrom as the best guard in the NFL, one of only 3 guards with above a 90 rating, along with Joe Thuney and Quentin Nelson. In 2022, he was a historically good run blocker. I think it's up there with Trent Williams' 2021 season as one of the 2 best run blocking seasons that I've ever watched for an offensive lineman. Last year, he took a slight step back to being just a great to elite run blocker, still put out dominant tape every week, moving people off the line of scrimmage, eliminating linebackers at the 2nd level. He's probably the most explosive guard out of his stance in the NFL. He can get from the line of scrimmage to 5 yards down the field in the blink of an eye. He's the best cut blocker in the NFL, I think, by a clear margin. He's a great reach blocker, perfect scheme fit if they continue to run a lot of outside zone, but he can also get movement off the line of scrimmage on duo and gap scheme runs. But there were a few more missed assignments in the run game last year, some whiffs and blown blocks. I think it's hard to watch the Falcons offense and come away thinking that Chris Lindstrom is a problem for them in the run game, but holding him to the standard of what we know he's capable of, it was a slight down year. He's another player that's a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker, but still one of the best pass blocking guards in the NFL. Because he doesn't have elite size and power, he makes up for that by taking the fight to the pass rusher. He's got a really quick, aggressive 2-hand punch. He has good slide quickness and recovery skills, but he does get overwhelmed by some of the better power rushers. His week 1 matchup with Derek Brown was, I think, the single one-on-one matchup that he definitively lost last year. He also had a couple bad reps against Jeffrey Simmons in week 8, but overall, I think he's the best guard in the NFL. 2 consecutive 2nd-team All-Pros. I think it should have been 2 consecutive 1st-team All-Pros, and I actually have him rated as the best player on the Falcons roster. And Caleb McGarry Terry at right tackle, another player that's really good in the run game, but he's steadily improved his pass blocking, I think, every season of his career. Like Chris Lindstrom, he's at his best blocking outside zone, but he can also generate power in the gap scheme run game. You look at Zach Robinson coming over from LA back in 2016, 2017, they were a very heavy outside zone scheme, but over the years, they've transitioned into one of the heaviest duo teams in the NFL. I definitely think it would be a mistake to abandon outside zone based on the personnel that they have, but if they do transition into more of a gap heavy scheme, I think they've got the players to execute that. And when you look at the starting five, the Falcons are one of 5 NFL teams that don't have a player with below a 75 rating. As for the depth, they've got Storm Norton as a backup right tackle. He's pretty good for a 6th offensive lineman. I'm going through all the tape and I'm saving clips, adding them to folders. There were a handful of Storm Norton pancakes that I accidentally added to the Caleb McGarry folder because they were pretty indistinguishable watching them play. But like, you watch this rep against the Jets, he just gets melted by Bryce Huff's speed to power. He's not really a starting caliber pass protector, but he can fill in for a couple games and won't be a major problem. Ryan Newsel was a UDFA in 2021. He filled in for Drew Dalman a couple games and I thought was pretty solid for a backup. He had a really nice reach block on this crack toss play against Chicago. Tyler Vrabel, another UDFA, had one start against Tampa Bay in week 14, didn't allow a pressure. He was one of my lowest graded players in the 2022 class out of like 320 players that I evaluated, but he could potentially be some solid depth. And then guys like Kyle Hinton, Jovan Gwynn, Andrew Stuber will be competing for the last roster spots. So 14th best offense. Like I said, I'm kind of giving the low end for offensive coordinator. This could easily be anywhere from, 14th to 8th best offense in the NFL. And then I've got them with the 20th best defense in the NFL. I am giving Raheem Morris credit here for what he's shown over the last few years. And across the board, it's an extremely solid unit. Outside of edge rusher, which I have as the worst edge rusher room in the NFL. Something about the NFC South and an inability to build a good group of edge rushers. 4 of the 6 lowest rated teams at edge rusher are in the NFC South, and it's really the one aspect of this defensive roster that I think is going to hold this team back. I have their best edge rusher as Arnold Ebiketie, a player that I really liked coming out of Penn State. He definitely showed flashes in year 2, but has not put it all together to become a consistent pass rusher at the NFL level. His best rep of the season was probably this double swipe against New Orleans. Really good job selling the speed to power. Once he draws out the punch, he defeats the outside hand, bends around the corner, gets the sack on Derek Carr. But this did come against Landon Young, who was a 6th round pick in 2021 and a career backup. A nice rep here against Andrew Wiley, works him back into the pocket with speed to power, disengages, counters inside, gets a pursuit sack. He had this sack against the Jets where outside of the soft chip help from the tight end, he was pretty much unblocked to the quarterback. This play against Minnesota, he's dropping back into coverage, quarterback spy. Once Dobbs breaks the pocket, he closes in, forces the fumble. Lorenzo Carter picks it up and brings it back to the 1. And then he had this sack against Tennessee where he's unblocked off the edge. Will Levis just kind of surrenders on 3rd down. So he did technically step up his production last year from a sack standpoint, going from 3 in his first year to 7 in 2023. But I don't really think the sack increase was indicative of him taking this huge step as a pass rusher when you look at the quality of the plays. I still have a lot of hope for Arnold Ebiketie. I think he has the highest upside of any of their edge rushers, but I still view him as an unproven player. Lorenzo Carter is an extremely underwhelming pass rusher, but a pretty solid run defender. I could just copy and paste that analysis for most of Atlanta's front 4 defenders. He sets a firm edge, he's a solid block shedder, does his job in the run game. He's very athletic, so you can scheme him up some production on stunts and twists, but doesn't really have much of a move set. 6 years in the NFL, he just hasn't developed a pass rushing skill set that you can win with consistently. I like this ghost move against Mekhi Becton to win around the corner. Don't think this was registered as a sack, but a hit that forced an incompletion. This play against Tristan Wirfs comes in late, fighting through the chip help, speed to power, opens up the inside, and sacks Baker Mayfield. He's athletic enough to where he could find his way to, 6 or 7 sacks if he gets some stunts and some unblocked pursuit sacks, but I'm not really expecting a whole lot from him as a pass rusher. They took Braylon Trice in the 3rd round. Unfortunately, can't show college film, but I will put up the scouting report reports for all of the drafted players. He led college football in pressures last season. He's a high motor player, decent bull rush and speed to power. I just don't think he has the athletic traits or the overall move set for that to translate cleanly to the NFL. Hopefully he exceeds my expectations and becomes a productive player. Even if that happens, I still think it will be as a second or third edge rusher. When you look around the NFL, there just aren't very many number one pass rushers with his athletic profile. And then the last two guys I want to talk about are more hybrid players that I could have easily included in the defensive line section. Zach Harrison is a hybrid edge defensive end. Sometimes they play him at 3 tech. They took him in the 3rd round last year. He has some of the longest arms in the NFL, and Falcons fans can probably tell me in the comments, but just based on the tape, it looks like he added some weight last year. He was immediately a really good run defender. His length allows him to establish separation from blocks so easily. He's got the play strength to anchor at the point of attack, and he can shed, disengage quickly, and make plays in the backfield. I don't know if the plan is to transition him fully to an interior player, but as a hybrid defensive end, I think he has elite potential in run support. As a pass rusher, he was very ineffective in his rookie year. 13 pressures, 3 sacks on 164 pass rushing snaps. I watched all these games chronologically, and like the first 13 or 14 weeks, I mean, there weren't even signs of life from Zach Harrison as a pass rusher. He doesn't really have a go-to way of winning with his hands, and he's an 18-wheeler trying to turn the corner. But in week 16 against the Colts, he actually had some wins with his bull rush. The problem is they came against Blake Freeland, another rookie who was one of the weakest offensive linemen in the NFL last year. This play, he's able to get into his frame, launch him back into the pocket, trips up Gardner Minshew and closes in for the sack. Right here, he does a good job of forklifting the hands, lifting him up by the wrists so he can't get a firm point of contact and walking him back into the pocket. And then he did have a late win around the corner against Bernard Raymond, who's a really good left tackle. He got a quarterback hit against another rookie tackle, Carter Warren, for the Jets. Good job beating the outside hand with the double swipe. I kind of view this more as bad tackle play. There is some potential as a power rusher, but I think he's a ways away from reaching it. And even if he does reach his potential, like, I don't think Zach Harrison's going to solve the Falcons' edge rusher issue. And Brandon Dorlus, arguably closer to a defensive lineman than he is an edge rusher. He was kind of a tough evaluation because he's one of those players where you got to figure out if he's versatile or if he just doesn't have a positional fit. At his playing size in college, he's not big or strong enough to play 3 technique and anchor against double teams, but he doesn't have the athleticism or explosiveness to really threaten offensive tackles around the edge. He is a very skilled pass rusher. He's smooth, changing directions, quick with his hands. If he can add weight and maintain that athleticism, I think he does have a lot of upside as a pass rushing 3 tech, but anytime you're talking about transforming someone's body, that kind of adds a lot of uncertainty that's going to affect my draft grade for them at least. So given the draft capital that they spent, I think they made solid moves to upgrade this position, but it still is the worst in the NFL to me. The defensive line is a lot better, but Grady Jarrett's a bit of an uncertainty coming off the ACL tear that he suffered in week 8. Over the last few years, he's taken kind of a step back from prime Grady Jarrett. Still a solid, productive, starting caliber player, but just not as consistently productive as a pass rusher especially. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to come back to full strength off the ACL tear, but that is a question mark for sure. They signed David Onyemata from New Orleans last year, and I thought he had an outstanding season, one of the best seasons from David Onyemata that I've seen. I think his block shedding ability in the run game is elite. I mean, this play against the Jets, he just ragdolls the rookie center Joe Tippmann. He has such a firm 2-hand punch on initial contact, really raises the blocker's pad level, establishes early control of the interaction. He has the lower body strength to hold the point of attack and the upper body strength to manipulate the block in whichever direction he needs to. And watching him lock, peek, shed, it's just teach tape after teach tape. But heading into year 9, he still is an effective pass rusher, not dominant, but 35 to 40 pressures, 5 to 6 sacks a year, I think is what you can expect from David Onyemata. This play against Tampa Bay, you see the bull rush into the arm over, slams Baker Mayfield into the ground. Nice chop rip here against Jonah Jackson to attack the outside hand. hand. This play against the Jets, he uses a double swipe to defeat the outside hand, bends around the corner, hits the quarterback. So I would say ideally he's your third best pass rusher, maybe second you could get away with. Depending on what Grady Jarrett looks like, I think he might be the Falcons' best pass rusher this year, which is not ideal, but very solid player. Going off of my rating scale, you know, the definition of a good starter. They drafted Ruka Roro with the 35th pick. Definitely too rich for me based on my grade, but not a terrible reach, especially considering how in-demand defensive tackles were this year. He has, I think, a lot of upside. You see flashes of his ability as a pass rusher. He's a very technically sound and assignment-secure run defender, and he looks like a good athlete on tape. He tested like one of the most athletic defensive line prospects ever. I didn't quite see the elite testing that he showed at the combine, but definitely some athletic upside there. And Clemson defensive linemen are tough to evaluate. They don't really let their pass rushers, especially their interior pass rushers, just tee off and try to pressure the quarterback. You got to really dig through the tape to find examples of them actually getting to work pass rushing moves and see what it would look like if they're playing a 3 technique role in the NFL. So it would not shock me if he was more productive as a rookie than he was in his last year at college. He does need to add some play strength, I think, to hold up in the run game, but you know, I'm optimistic about him developing down the line. And then his depth, they've got Taquan Graham and Contavious Street. Graham has elite length, but he's kind of lacking in bulk, and he's not really a great athlete. He had some potential coming out of Texas, and he's been a solid rotational defensive lineman, but never really developed into an impact player. Contavious Street has bounced around several teams. San Francisco, I think he was with the Eagles before they picked him up. They signed him in the middle of last year. He started a few games for them, but he's very undersized, kind of a liability in the run game. And as a small, explosive defensive lineman, he just doesn't have the pass rushing juice or skill set to really make up for his weaknesses. And it's a very solid group of linebackers. Probably the biggest discrepancy in draft capital investment and quality of play. I would also say of all the positional groups in the NFL, it's one of the biggest gaps between national recognition and how good they are. Caden Ellis is a criminally underrated player. I never hear anyone talk about him, but I have him as tied for the 11th best linebacker in the NFL. A lot of linebackers are either thumping, stack, and shed guys, or they're smaller linebackers that have to just outrun and avoid blocks. But Ellis has the ability to anchor and shed blocks with his hands, but at the same time zigzag and weave through traffic. He almost looks like Russell Westbrook, just slashing and slicing through help defense, getting to the basket. If you want to watch a full game of elite linebacker play, check out Caden Ellis versus the Colts in week 16. It was a dominant performance. He reads the game so quickly. He knows exactly the most efficient path to take to the ball. He knows how the blocks are going to set up and what type of contact he has to avoid. He has the size to play off of blocks. He's a good tackler. He adds some value as a pass rusher. He isn't an elite cover linebacker, but definitely holds his own in that phase. You see him right here running with Cade Otton on this out and up, gets his head turned around down the field, plays the ball in the air, and then a nice job on this play defending TJ Hawkinson on this option route. Subtle grab of the arm away from the ref's field of vision, sticks his hand into the passing lane and shields the receiver from the ball. And they were expecting Troy Anderson, their second round pick in 2022, to be one of their long-term starting linebackers, but he tore his pec in week 3, and Nate Landman, a UDFA from the same class, stepped in and gave them really good linebacker play. He started every game outside of weeks 1 and 3, and he had the second highest run stop rate of any linebacker in the NFL. Compared to Caden Ellis, he isn't as good of a block shedder. He isn't as consistent of a tackler, but like Ellis, he diagnoses things extremely quickly in the run game, always in the right spot. He still has the size to play off of blocks. He's not someone that gets pushed around at the second level. So they ended up weathering the storm of losing Troy Anderson and actually finding a quality starter from a UDFA. He also had 3 forced fumbles last year. That's the kind of thing where it's hard to project if that's going to continue from year to year, but still a lot of high value plays that he's adding. And as a run defending second linebacker, I feel great about Nate Landman. Now in coverage, I thought he really struggled, and it's not like Troy Anderson was great there as a rookie, but if he can get back healthy and at least take somewhat of a step forward, I actually think there's a chance that you want to have Anderson in there as your second linebacker. He ran something in the 4.8s, so there are speed and athleticism limitations with Nate Landman. You see this play, he's out leveraged on the slip screen, loses the corner to Alvin Kamara and misses the tackle. Right here, he's trying to run with the tight end on this dig route, but just can't keep up with him step for step. And then right here, he can't keep up with DeAndre Hopkins on this drag route and ends up giving up a touchdown. But he also really needs to improve his awareness in coverage. After Richie Grant, I think Nate Landman probably led this team in coverage busts. This play, he loses track of his assignment. Brian Robinson, he leaks out of the backfield uncovered on this screen and takes it for a touchdown. Right here, hard bite on the play action, can't connect to the tight end leaking out, and he doesn't have the athletic traits to recover when he gets himself out of position, and he's just oblivious to stuff developing behind him in zone coverage. This play, he just drops to his spot, covers grass, doesn't recognize the drag route developing behind him, and gives up a big play. And then right here, again, he's just dropping to his spot, covering one 2x2 area of the field. This deep out from the number 3 goes completely uncovered, and the Saints convert third down. So even though Nate Landman was very good in the run game, and I think he should be considered the day one starter, if Troy Anderson can give you a bit of an upgrade in coverage, I think that might be an avenue you want to explore. And JD Bertrand is their 4th linebacker. I thought was a solid pick in the 5th round. He's undersized, but a heat-seeking missile type of player, has no fear of contact. There were a lot of plays on his Notre Dame tape where he would just kind of spear himself into the offensive line and not even make the tackle, but he would make the play just by disrupting the timing and spacing. And at the Senior Bowl, he was by far the most communicative linebacker on the field. It's hard to evaluate linebackers in Mobile, but you could hear him from the stands calling things out, making checks. I think he'll be a good special teams player and could potentially carve out a role as a starter sometime down the line. The cornerback room is kind of similar to receiver, where they have a great number 1 and then a lot of questions outside of that, although I do think they have more options at corner than they do receiver. After his breakout second year in 2021, AJ Terrell had kind of a down year in 2022, and then last year he bounced back to form and I think reestablished himself as one of the best corners in the NFL. I have him rated as the 6th best corner in the NFL, tied with Jalen Ramsey and L'Jarius Sneed. He's an outstanding press corner, good ball skills, smart in zone coverage. He's one of those players that has the most difficult matchup on the field, usually in press, usually covering the team's best receiver, so he will give up some plays, but hard to do a whole lot better than AJ Terrell as your cornerback 1. CB2 is where there's some more questions. I have them going with Clark Phillips right now, but it could easily end up being Antonio Hamilton. Phillips was a 4th round pick in 2023. He got his first start in week 14 against Tampa Bay. I don't know if Okudah got injured or if they benched him. Falcons fans can let me know in the comments, but that first start against the Bucs was outstanding. He was targeted 6 times, gave up 0 receptions. He was covering Mike Evans, Chris Godwin for most of the game, and pretty much playing blanket coverage. So after watching that start, I was thinking, man, the Falcons might have found a steal here in the 4th round. The rest of his tape was a lot more up and down, still had some good plays. This is a really nice break on this speed out against DJ Moore, I think. It's hard to tell with some of these week 17 plays in the snowstorm. The all-22 is pretty much ruined. And he had a nice pass breakup here in the end zone against the Saints from week 18. But looking at his tape overall, it's hard to be too confident in him being a consistently tight man coverage player. He's very grabby and had a difficult time mirroring horizontal breaks. He got some holding penalties, some illegal contact, sometimes where he was just completely off balance, ended up on the ground, allowing a lot of separation. He also lost track of his assignment a lot when they would attack his blind spot. This play, Chuba Hubbard gets high and outside, disconnects from the route, ends up about 10 yards away from him by the time he makes the catch. Right here, Adam Thielen shakes him on this stop route, sends him drifting backwards, and then he gave up some insane contested catches in the week 18 matchup with New Orleans. Right here, he just can't reach into the catching window. A.T. Perry makes a really nice grab on this jump ball. And then this play against Chris Olave, it's hard to fault Clark Phillips too much for anything he did or didn't do. It's just an insane grab by Olave. I think the ball actually ends up bouncing off of Clark Phillips' helmet and Olave comes down with it. So Phillips' play was kind of up and down. It's a small sample size with just 5 or 6 starts. He showed enough flashes that I'm comfortable projecting him as the cornerback 2, but I definitely think it'll be an open competition. At slot, I'm assuming they go with D. Alford, who's a second-year UDFA. He's a playmaker, someone that definitely pops off the tape whenever you watch the Falcons defense, but at this point, he just isn't a consistently sticky man coverage player, so if you had a potential upgrade, I think you definitely want to explore that. This rep against Chris Olave is just textbook as far as anticipating the comeback route when the receiver attacks your blind spot. He had some great plays in the Houston game and the first Tampa Bay game. This play, he sticks with Robert Woods as he extends his route for the scramble drill, ends up getting the pass breakup, and then right here, he sticks tight to this deep over, gets into the passing lane and forces the incompletion. This play, he squares up with Mike Evans, undercuts the post route in the red zone, and then good job in zone coverage here to break up this pass to Chris Godwin. But I felt like he was a lot better in coverage earlier in the season. His level of play kind of declined as the year went on. And looking at this plot, which has PFF's separation prevented for corners, which I think is the best cornerback metric that's available. I think it lines up with the film most often. He was one of the worst in the league in terms of separation prevented or separation allowed. And he tries to play off the guys and not make too much unnecessary contact, but he just doesn't have the elite fluidity and mirror skills to get away with doing that. He consistently lets receivers separate out of their breaks and ends up allowing a lot of big plays. Antonio Hamilton could be some competition for that cornerback 2 spot. He's a really interesting player, a UDFA in 2016 that didn't really see meaningful playing time until 2022 or 2021. He didn't have more than 140 snaps in a season until 2021 when he went to Arizona. And by the second half of 2023, he had established a role as a full-time starter and actually showed that he was a pretty good corner. He is very aggressive, especially from off coverage. He'll make a lot of plays breaking on a deep out, but then he'll also get beat biting on a double move, and he doesn't have elite explosiveness, so there are sometimes he'll try to make a play on a deep out, but he just can't get there in time. I think he's a good backup option if Clark Phillips doesn't take that next step. You have at least a replacement level starter that you feel okay about, but ideally Phillips can develop and win that second starter job. And then Kevin King and Mike Hughes are former first-round picks, career journeyman backup types. Hughes is more of a slot that can play outside. I've never really been impressed with what I've seen from him. And Kevin King, I haven't seen play in what seems like forever. He actually hasn't registered a snap since 2021, but what I remember from him, he's a player that you probably don't want seeing the field. And the best group on this defense is safety, which ranks 4th in the NFL. Jesse Bates, as good as he was all those years in Cincinnati, I think had a career season in 2023. He made so many plays as the center fielding free safety, baptized Bryce Young a couple times in week 1. He got a pick 6 on Derek Carr in week 12, saw that slant from Rashid Shaheed from the snap. So he was making plays all over the field in coverage, but then he was also an elite run defender and he had 3 forced fumbles. As it stands now, I would say Kyle Hamilton is probably the most versatile safety in the NFL, but Jesse Bates and Antoine Winfield Jr. are the most complete safeties. And then we were expecting or hoping that Richie Grant would take the next step and be a really good running mate to Jesse Bates. He ended up being a liability for the Falcons defense at times, just so many coverage busts, constantly out of position. I thought he had a really promising second year in 2022, but in 2023, he gave up 5 touchdowns and ended up getting benched for a 7th round pick, DeMarco Helms. And I was pleasantly surprised by Helms' tape. He's like the polar opposite of Richie Grant. He doesn't really make a lot of plays, didn't have an interception or a pass breakup, but he doesn't give up any plays. On 249 coverage snaps, he allowed a total of 36 yards, 1 reception over 10 yards, was a 12-yard catch in week 16. He's a great run defender. He can shed blocks, physical tackler, perfect fit as a box safety next to Jesse Bates. I think speed and athleticism is definitely a question. There were a couple times that he got beat down the field, but he wasn't targeted, but he's looking like a really good find in the 7th round and definitely someone I'm comfortable with starting. So that's going to do it for today's video. I plan on doing some other team previews like this. Don't have time to get to every single team, but I'd like to cover some of the more interesting teams in the NFL, ideally outside of the top 10. And let me know in the comments any teams that you'd be interested in seeing a deep dive on.